floor is yours. So the next couple of interviews, really the next couple of interviews, we're going to focus on the research you've done on EHS and the scientific and maybe even non-scientific proof that you found over many, many, many years on the existence of electrohypersensitivity and the impact of EMF on health. So I'm very excited to go into the next couple of recordings.
Yeah, and I should not go into too many factual details that we can view in the publications. They are all available and to be found on the internet or via other sources. And it's so fascinating for me personally because I had, and that was not because of me, but because of my supervisor and all the collaborators I had during my PhD years. I had a glorious scientific journey, starting from day one when I entered the Department of Histology, which I didn't know at that time was the #1 department at the Karolinska Institute and extremely well known all around the world. And it took me, and believe it or not, it sounds like bragging, but I say again, it wasn't because of me. There were other people around me, but it only took me 3 days to have my name on the first manuscript. Most PhD students would wait for years before they have that, but it took me 3 days. And after another few weeks, I had my first publication or manuscript rather in the journal Science, which later was published. And from that on, it just rolled on like a crazy roller coaster. And it was only going up, 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 and never down, up, 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 up. And this is very, very important because that meant that I got used to publishing papers on a very constant stream together with the very foremost experts in the world, including Nobel laureates or people that were very close to become Nobel laureates. So I really got used to having a tremendous time of my life. Then I presented my PhD thesis. That went very, very well. And after that, it's customary to not continuously collide with your supervisor and your previous collaborators, to change your area of interest and go into some new area. And so I did. And one thing I did was that in my PhD thesis, I had a paper in the journal Nature about a very rare experimental subject, actually, namely human beings. So I turned away from guinea pigs, mice, rats, and so on, which we had used, and entered the field of human medicine and human science. And I started off with normal healthy volunteers. And as you know, most people, they don't want to donate like their brain, because the brain, spinal cord, and the nerves were the areas we had been investigating in my PhD work. So they want to keep their brain, they want to keep their spinal cord, their heart, and so on. But most people are willing to give you a small biopsy piece of their skin. And so we started with normal, healthy skin. And I thought, stupidly and naively, that science had already investigated all the details of human skin, but I was completely wrong. It was really a white area, and a lot of information was missing. So we could quickly start filling in gaps of knowledge. And it didn't take very long before clinical dermatologists heard about us and came to us and said, oh, couldn't you look at these skin biopsies from psoriasis or from other skin illnesses, including, of course, also different forms of cancer tumors? And we were very happy to say, yes, of course we can do that. So we continued along these lines. And again, it was very, very simple to get the papers published. because everything we did was brand new and therefore of big interest. So I got very spoiled for the second time. Then something happened. And I've told this story many times. One evening at 8 o'clock, when I was about to leave the laboratory, I was the last person left at the laboratory. Someone had left a radio on, and I was approaching it to turn it off when I hear a woman, and her name is Kajsa Vedin, and she worked at the time in Göteborg on the west coast of Sweden in the trade union offices, and she was talking about a new category of patients, namely men and women that had started to use the newly introduced personal computers. And then you realize here in Sweden, we are in the beginning of the 1980s. And while sitting down in front of these big cathode ray tubes, using them as, for instance, word processors, doing office work, they got skin problems, skin irritation, pricking pain, itch, heat sensation, redness, swelling of the skin, and more. And she talked about some kind of electrical allergy, which later was turned into the word screen dermatitis, and furthermore down the line was turned into the functional impairment electrohypersensitivity. You know, Davida, had I turned off the radio, we would never have met. We wouldn't have this conversation right now. So it's sometimes, you know, the finger of God is very obvious. Something is going on. And at the same time, you know, the following years became extremely harsh for me. And the personal cost and also the cost for my family and relatives and so on, honestly became too big, too large, you know. But coming back to the radio program, I got excited and thought, wow, we have human beings being placed in front of a cathode ray tube, a computer screen, and they get like sunburn sensations in the middle of the Swedish winter. And trust me, there is no sun outdoors then, you know. It's darkness, gloomy weather, cold, snow, rain, that kind of things. And so I thought, wow, could this be a simple radiation damage because of the electromagnetic fields? So I called this lady because in the radio program, she had asked for help. She said that if someone, being a clinical neurologist, could help me, I would be so thankful. And I'm not a clinical neurologist, but I'm a neuroscientist. And I thought, well, that's close enough. I know a bit about the brain, the spinal cord, the nerves, and above all, I knew quite a lot about the human skin because we had been dealing with normal healthy volunteers and various skin diseases. So I felt we were prepared to attack this question, and naively I thought it was so simple. And so you know, Swedes are naive, you know. And I called this lady, and we arranged for her to travel from Göteborg on the west coast up to Stockholm. And she also brought a physicist, Yngve Hamnerius was his name, and we met at the Karolinska Institute. And the rest is history and the reason why we talk today. Because after that meeting, we decided that we should, and it was my idea. I said, why don't we meet a number of such electrical allergic persons or patients and talk to them, ask them to get the general background. And it was decided we should do it in Göteborg on the west coast. So the next time I traveled down to them, and they had collected like 20 people, including a dentist, a psychologist, a psychiatrist, allergologist, immunologist, I being the neuroscientist, physicist, and so on, a lot of experts. And we sat down with 4 persons, which I from now on we call electro-hypersensitive, because they were exactly that, although they were called electrical allergy at the time. And we interviewed them just to get the grip on what is it to be electro-hypersensitive. And it was extremely interesting. One thing happened, which was very telling, because one of the ladies sitting at the corner of the room, and we were in a hospital that was being torn down, so the physicist had arrived earlier and removed all the fuses, so there were no electricity in this big room. And that was ideal because we could shut it off. But this woman sitting in the corner of the table, after like half an hour, and I saw her, that she became more and more uneasy. I saw that her face become more red and swollen. So something was going on. And after half an hour, she stood up and said, "I'm so sorry. I know that this room is completely devoid of any electricity, but I'm sorry, I still feel at unease here. So I will move myself diagonally across the room." And she did, and sat down, and it took like an hour. And then I saw her symptoms slowly disappeared. When she stood up and moved, after a few minutes, this physicist, Ingvar Hamnerius, excused himself and said that he was going to the bathroom, and he went out. He was away for 3, 4, 5 minutes and came back, sat down, didn't say anything. Then we continued the discussion, and we went on from, I think it was 9 in the morning to 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And then we thanked these 4 people, and they went away and left this hospital building. Then the psychologist started laughing and said, "Did you see that stupid woman imagining that she reacted to something in this room where there are no electromagnetic fields at all?" And then Ingvar Hamnerius said, "Well, I wouldn't be too sure about that. You see, when the woman pointed to that line of light tubes, I realized that I had forgotten to remove the fuse for those that she sat under." So this psychologist, he was very telling in the sense that he had a prejudice. He was not open at all to the possibility of someone reacting to electromagnetic fields. But the physicist realized that, yeah, that's probably what she did. And when he said he went to the bathroom, he didn't. He went out in the corridor and reviewed the last fuse for that line of light tubes. Isn't that amazing, you know? And then, and then we continue
to what you've just said. So I'm fascinated listening to you, because that's exactly when I walk into a room where there's something, and it might be a LED light, it could be a bunch of extension cords with poor wiring, whatever it is, it could be Wi-Fi. You use the words uneasy, and that's literally, you feel, you know, and what my husband says is he immediately knows when something is bothering me, because it's almost annoyed, but I get very uneasy. I don't want to use the word anxious, because it's not really anxious, but I get easily annoyed. And then he knows there's something, and we need to, as he did, go and find the source and get rid of it. So it's amazing. I wish that people out there just raise the awareness that if they have this discomfort, when they feel uneasy and they have no idea why, just start looking around you and become aware of what you're exposed to, so that you can make the link.